In 1934, a drunk Italian mobster made the worst mistake of his life. He spat in the face of a black gangster named Bumpy Johnson in front of 40 laughing witnesses. What none of them knew was that Bumpy Johnson had survived 3 assassination attempts before his 30th birthday, that he had made Dutch Schultz's top lieutenants vanish without a trace, that he never forgot an insult and never left a debt unpaid, and that the smile spreading across his spit-covered face was not surrender. It was something far, far worse. Little Italy, New York, Thursday, September 13th, 1934, 23:17 in the evening. The basement of Umberto's restaurant smelled of Cuban cigars, aged grappa, and power. 40 men in expensive suits sat around a long oak table. 40 pairs of eyes that had seen things that would break ordinary men. And among all those olive-skinned Mediterranean faces, there was only one black face. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat at the far end of the table, wearing a dark gray English wool suit that cost him 4 months of gambling profits, white shirt with French cuffs, burgundy silk tie in a perfect Windsor knot. He had been invited to discuss what the Italians called the Harlem question. Who would control the black neighborhoods, those who lived there or those who considered themselves masters of everything? If you want to find out how this incredible story ends, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. A man stood up from the table. Vinny Mad Dog Cortezy. He had earned that nickname by literally biting a rival to death during a street fight. 37 years old, face covered in scars, eyes burning with that particular madness that comes from a lifetime of violence without consequence. He had been drinking all evening, and now he walked toward Bumpy with the swagger of a man who believed himself untouchable. Cortezy stopped 2 feet from Bumpy, swayed, grinned, and spat directly into his face. The glob of saliva landed on Bumpy's right cheek and began sliding down like a tear made of contempt. "That's how you talk to dirty animals who don't know their place," Cortezy screamed. "You think you're equal to us. You're nothing. You're dirt beneath my feet." The room exploded with laughter. 40 men howling, slapping the table, tears streaming down their faces. This was the moment of absolute humiliation, the moment when a man is reduced to less than human in front of everyone who matters. Bumpy Johnson did not move. For exactly 40 seconds, he sat motionless while saliva dripped down his face. 40 heartbeats. He counted each one. Then, slowly, he reached into his breast pocket, withdrew a pristine white handkerchief, and began to wipe his face. Not hurriedly, not desperately, but methodically, as if nothing had happened, as if Cortezy was merely a fly that had landed on him by accident. The laughter began to die. Something was wrong. This man was not reacting the way a victim should react. Bumpy folded the handkerchief, put it away, and looked at Cortezy with eyes that were completely empty. Not angry, empty, like the eyes of a man looking at an insect before crushing it beneath his heel. Then he smiled. "In 11 days, Bumpy said quietly, you will learn exactly how much one spit costs, Vinny." He stood, straightened his jacket. 13 pieces, exactly that many, and walked out without another word. Cortezy raised his glass. "To making sure they all know their place." They applauded. They poured drinks. They congratulated him on his victory. That was the last time Vinny Cortezy ever laughed. To understand what happened next, you need to know who Cortezy had just spat upon, because Bumpy Johnson was not just any man from Harlem. He was the monster that other monsters feared. Charleston, South Carolina, 1915. A 16-year-old boy named Ellsworth Johnson stood over a grown man who had just called his mother something no son should ever hear. That man now had only one eye. The other one young Ellsworth held in his fist. By 1932, Bumpy was at war with Dutch Schultz, the most powerful bootlegger in New York. Schultz sent men into Harlem. They did not come back. He sent more. They vanished. He sent his best lieutenant, Bo Weinberg. Weinberg returned without his right hand, delivered to Schultz in a gift box with a note. The next delivery will be larger. Schultz himself carved a scar across Bumpy's face with a knife. Next time, it's your throat, he promised. Bumpy looked at him with blood running down his cheek and said, "You should have cut deeper." Within a year, 3 of Schultz's top men had permanently vanished. This was the man 40 Italians had laughed at. This was the man they thought they had broken with one spit. Midnight. Bumpy's apartment on 145th Street. 12 men sat in the living room waiting. When Bumpy Johnson called at this hour, you came. You came quickly, and you listened. "Tonight," Bumpy said, "a man named Vinnie Cortezy spat in my face in front of 40 witnesses. But this is not about me." He walked slowly along the window, hands clasped behind his back. "When Cortezy spat on me, he spat on every black man in this city, every father called boy in front of his children, every mother scrubbing floors for pennies. He spat on you, on your mothers, on your children, and I am going to answer so loudly that for the next 50 years, no white gangster will even think about doing this again." He turned to face them. "I want everything about Vinnie Cortezy, where he lives, where he sleeps, who he sleeps with, his debts, his roots, his fears. You have 72 hours." The 12 men scattered across 5 boroughs, and within 48 hours, Bumpy knew something delicious. Cortezy was already afraid. He was not sleeping. He checked locks obsessively. He flinched at shadows. Someone had whispered in his ear after the meeting, one of the older bosses who understood what he had done. Bumpy Johnson is not someone you humiliate and let walk away. You should not have done this. But Cortezy's fear made him do something even more pathetic than spitting. He sold his mother's house, $12,000 cash, the house where Rosa Cortezy had lived for 43 years, the house filled with photographs and memories and the smell of Sunday sauce. He sold it to hire protection. Rosa stood on the sidewalk with a single suitcase, watching her home pass to strangers. She looked at her son without tears. Sicilian women of her generation did not cry in front of their children. "You are not the man your father was," she said quietly. "Your father faced his enemies. He never ran. Whatever is coming for you, you have earned it." She walked away and never looked back. By Wednesday, Cortezy had transformed his mistress's apartment on Flatbush Avenue into a fortress. Steel door, iron bars on every window, 6 Irish mercenaries from the Hell's Kitchen Westies, men who had survived 3 gang wars and feared nothing, 2 Thompson submachine guns, enough ammunition for a small war. Cortezy walked through his fortress, checking positions, and smiled for the first time in days. Let him come. Let the great Bumpy Johnson try to get through this. 3 blocks away, in a car with darkened windows, Marcus Webb lowered his binoculars and smiled too. He built himself a castle, Marcus reported that night. Bumpy nodded slowly. "Good. A rat in a hole thinks it's safe, but you don't need to dig out a rat. You just need to make it want to come out. How? By showing it that walls mean nothing, that guards mean nothing, that nothing it can do will ever be enough." Friday, September 21st, rain hammering Brooklyn streets, 9:45 in the evening. Cortezy sat in the back room of an illegal casino 3 blocks from his fortress, losing money he did not have, drinking whiskey that was not calming him. Outside, 8 men waited in the darkness. At 10:33, Cortezy left the casino. He walked with his collar up, hand resting on the pistol in his waistband. 3 blocks to safety. 4 minutes of walking. The last 4 minutes of freedom he would ever know. 90 seconds into his walk, a black Packard pulled alongside him. The rear window rolled down, and a voice emerged from the darkness, soft, educated, terrifying. "Nice night for a walk, Vinny." Cortezy drew his weapon. His hand trembled so violently the barrel shook. "Stay away from me. I'll shoot." "Put the gun down, Vinny. Let's talk like civilized men." "After what you're planning? You think I'm stupid?" "I think," Bumpy's voice came gentle as a lullaby, "that you should run to your fortress now. Your steel doors, your Irish guards. Run, Vinny. I want to show you exactly how little those things mean." Cortezy ran. He burst through the steel door screaming for his guards. 6 armed mercenaries took positions at every entry point. "He's here! Bumpy Johnson is here!" The lead mercenary, a scarred Irishman named O'Brien, walked to the window. "I don't see anyone." "He was there, in a car. He talked to me." O'Brien looked at Cortezy with something approaching contempt. "We're being paid to protect you from one colored man. Either he's the most dangerous man alive, or you're the biggest coward in Brooklyn." He paused. "Maybe both." 11 o'clock. The lights went out, not just in the apartment, the entire block, every street lamp, every window, darkness absolute. Then came the smell, gasoline, sharp, unmistakable, seeping through cracks around the windows, pooling on the fire escape. Then came the knocking, not at the door, at the walls, the ceiling, the floor, from everywhere at once. Boom, 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 like a funeral drum, like footsteps of something massive approaching through the darkness. For 5 minutes, the pounding continued. 5 minutes of relentless terror. Cortezy, aged 10 years, his face going gray, his hands shaking so violently he could not hold his weapon. Then, silence. A voice from outside the steel door. Calm, almost friendly. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Jake Williams. Some call me Preacher. I work for Mr. Bumpy Johnson. I have a message for the Irish gentleman inside." O'Brien's finger tightened on his trigger. "You were hired for 1 week. That week ended 2 hours ago. You may leave now with your lives and your money, or you can stay and die for a man who sold his own mother's house to hire you. A man currently cowering in the bathroom." Cortezy was indeed in the bathroom. He had fled there 30 seconds ago. "You have 60 seconds. Then the gasoline ignites." O'Brien looked at his men, 5 faces calculating odds. 45 seconds. One mercenary lowered his weapon. "I didn't sign up for this." 30 seconds. Another weapon lowered, then another. O'Brien closed his eyes. He had killed 7 men. He had never retreated from a fight. But this was not a fight. This was a slaughter waiting to happen. "We're coming out." The 6 Irish mercenaries filed past a shadow in the hallway and disappeared into the rain. 4 men entered the apartment. They moved through rooms systematically until they reached the bathroom door. Locked. From inside, ragged breathing, the scratch of metal on metal. "He's got a razor," Marcus whispered. He drove his shoulder into the door, and there, in the beam of their flashlights, sat Vinny Mad Dog Cortezy. On the floor between the toilet and bathtub, pants soaked with urine, the stench unmistakable. In his trembling hand, a straight razor pressed against his own throat. A thin line of blood from a shallow cut. But the blade was not moving. The hand holding it shook too violently to apply real pressure. The man who had earned his nickname by biting an enemy to death could not even find the courage to end his own life. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "You know," he said quietly, "there are men who face their end with dignity, who accept consequences standing up." He plucked the razor from Cortezy's unresisting fingers. "And then there is you. Bumpy is going to be disappointed. He thought you were at least a little bit of a man." They wrapped him in a blanket because no one wanted to smell him during the drive. At 11:43, Vinnie Cortezy vanished from the streets of New York. He would not be seen again, not in one piece. Midnight, the boundary between Friday and Saturday, a warehouse on East 120th Street that neighbors had learned to ignore. They called it the Quiet House. Those who entered rarely made sounds that could be heard from outside. The Packard pulled into the loading bay. Doors ground shut behind it with terrible finality. They dragged Cortezy from the car, still wrapped in that blanket, still reeking of his own terror, sat him in a chair in the center of the empty floor. The only light came from a single bare bulb swaying overhead, casting shadows that seemed to move with purpose. Then they waited. Do you know what silence sounds like when it carries the weight of death? It is not empty. It is full of anticipation, full of the certain knowledge that something is about to happen and nothing can prevent it. Cortezy sat in that silence for 17 minutes before he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, the footsteps of a man who had all the time in the world. Bumpy Johnson emerged from the shadows, dark blue suit, white shirt with French cuffs, that same burgundy tie from the night at Umberto's. In his right hand, he carried a leather satchel, old, worn, the kind a doctor might carry. He walked to a table near the wall and placed the satchel upon it, opened it slowly, began removing items one by one, placing them with the care of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Cortezy could not see what the items were. He did not want to see. Finally, Bumpy turned, walked to a second chair facing Cortezy, sat down, crossed his legs, and looked at the man who had spat in his face 9 days earlier. Silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. "Do you know why you are here, Vinnie?" Cortezy's mouth worked, but no words emerged. "You are here because 9 days ago you chose to spit in my face, in front of 40 witnesses. You called me an animal. You called me dirt. And then you laughed." Bumpy uncrossed his legs, leaned forward. "But you did not spit on me, Vinnie. You spat on every black man, woman, and child in this city. Every father who has been called boy in front of his children. Every mother who works 16 hours for white families and comes home too exhausted to hold her own babies. You spat on 200,000 people, and I am here to collect payment on their behalf. Please." Cortezy found his voice, a broken whisper. "I'll do anything. I'll pay. I'll apologize. I'll get on my knees in front of anyone you want." "You will do all of those things," Bumpy interrupted gently, "and more, but not because they will change anything. The outcome of tonight was decided the moment your saliva touched my face. Nothing you say, nothing you do, nothing you offer will change that outcome." He stood. "What will happen over the next 13 hours is not about revenge. Revenge is too small a word. This is about education. I am going to teach you something you should have learned as a child." He walked to the table, placed his hand on the leather satchel. "I am going to teach you the meaning of respect. We will not describe what happened in that warehouse over the next 13 hours. Some things are too dark for words. Some things leave stains on the soul of both speaker and listener, but this much can be said. Bumpy Johnson did not raise his voice, not once in 13 hours. He spoke in that same soft, educated tone throughout, quoting Shakespeare, referencing Dante, discussing philosophy and history and the nature of human dignity. He spoke of his childhood in South Carolina, of the humiliations he had witnessed, of the strength it takes to endure when the world tells you every day that you are worthless. And between each story, each lesson, each hour, there were other things that made Vinnie Cortezy understand, truly understand for the first time, what it meant to be stripped of dignity, what it meant to be treated as less than human. By hour 7, Cortezy was no longer screaming in fear. He was screaming in shame. He was seeing himself, truly seeing himself, for the first time. And what he saw was exactly what Bumpy had called him, an animal. By hour 10, he was confessing, not because anyone asked, but because the words poured out like poison from a wound. Every cruel thing he had ever done, every person he had hurt, every moment of casual brutality. By hour 12, he was silent. No more words, no more tears, just a broken thing that had once called itself Vinnie Cortezy, waiting for the end. At 1 o'clock Saturday afternoon, Bumpy looked at his watch. 13 hours, 13 lessons, one for each piece. He turned to Marcus. Prepare the delivery, best butcher paper, finest string, and a note, 3 words only. Sunday, September 23rd, 6:11 in the morning. First light painting Manhattan, gold and pink. Tony Salvatore stepped out of Lucky Luciano's headquarters on Broadway to smoke his first cigarette of the day. He had worked for Luciano 11 years. He had seen things that would make ordinary men vomit. Nothing surprised him anymore. His foot caught on something. He stumbled, caught himself on the iron railing, looked down, and stopped breathing. 13 packages, arranged on the stone steps in the shape of a human body. Head at the top, arms spread to the sides, legs at the bottom, all wrapped in pristine white butcher paper tied with brown string. On the topmost package rested a note. Cream-colored paper, expensive. 3 words in elegant calligraphy. Respect is mutual. And beneath, a single letter, B. Tony had seen bodies floating in the East River. He had seen men worked over with baseball bats and ice picks. He had once helped dispose of a rival who had been fed to pigs. He had never seen anything like this. These packages were not hastily assembled. They were carefully prepared, meticulously wrapped, arranged with deliberate symbolism. This was not murder. This was communication, a letter written in the oldest language humanity knows. By 7 o'clock, Lucky Luciano stood on his own front steps, looking down at what remained of Vinnie Cortezy. Luciano was not a man who showed emotion. He had built his empire through cold calculation, strategic thinking, the ability to make decisions other men found impossible. He had ordered executions without blinking, but as he stared at 13 packages that had once been one of his captains, something flickered across his face. Not grief. He had never liked Cortezy. Not anger. Something that looked almost like respect. Get everyone, he said quietly. Every boss, every captain, every advisor who matters, within the hour. By 8:30, 20 of the most powerful men in organized crime gathered around a mahogany table worth more than most Americans earned in a year. The room was divided. Don Calabrese slammed his fist on the table. This cannot stand. A colored man has killed one of ours and delivered him like a gift. If we do not respond with overwhelming force, we look weak, and weakness is death. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. But Frank Costello sat quietly, watching, calculating. He saw things the hotheads did not see. May I speak? Luciano nodded. Costello stood, walked to the window. Vinnie Cortezy spat in this man's face, in front of 40 of our people, called him an animal, and we all laughed. He turned to face the room. Now Cortezy arrives at our door in 13 pieces, with a note saying, "Respect is mutual." Does anyone fail to see the connection? Silence. We can declare war, send soldiers into Harlem. Some will not return. because whatever else Bumpy Johnson is, he is not stupid and not unprepared. We win eventually, yes, but at what cost? How many soldiers? How much income? How much position for Vinny Cortezy? A man who sold his mother's house and was found hiding in a bathroom, wet with his own urine. Uncomfortable shifts around the table. Or we acknowledge what none of us want to admit. Cortezy did something stupid. Insulted a man who did not deserve insult. And that man responded in the only language we understand. Costello looked directly at Luciano. If one of our captains had spat in a Sicilian don's face, unprovoked, before witnesses, what would we expect? We would say honor demanded response. We would say the don was within his rights. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded paper. This was delivered to my house at 5 this morning. He read aloud, Don Costello, I have no quarrel with you or your associates. My business is concluded. If the families wish to discuss terms of mutual respect, I am available to meet at neutral ground. But I offer this as good faith. I know where every man in that room lives, where their wives shop, which schools their children attend. War is possible. Peace is preferable. The choice is yours. Signed, Ellsworth Johnson. The room went very, very still. Luciano looked at the note for a long moment, then began to laugh, not happy, not amused, the laugh of a man who realizes he has been outmaneuvered by someone he underestimated. He wants to meet. Then we meet. Costello, arrange it. Neutral ground. No weapons, just talking. Charles, Calabrese began. The decision is made. Luciano's voice was flat, final. Vinny Cortezy was a fool who paid a fool's price. I will not spend good men's lives avenging a fool. Tuesday, September 25th, 1934. High noon. Central Park, near the lake. The weather was perfect. One of those crystalline September days when summer heat has finally broken, but winter has not yet begun to threaten. Leaves were just starting to turn at the edges, hints of gold and red appearing among the green. Families walked the paths. Children sailed toy boats on the water. An organ grinder played somewhere in the distance. And on a bench overlooking the lake, two of the most dangerous men in New York sat side by side, feeding breadcrumbs to ducks. From a distance, they might have been businessmen on lunch break, old friends catching up after years apart. No one watching would have guessed these two men controlled criminal empires worth tens of millions of dollars. That between them, they had been responsible for dozens of deaths. That 3 days earlier, one had delivered the other's captain in 13 pieces. Lucky Luciano was 40 years old. He had been stabbed, beaten, and left for dead on a Staten Island beach 8 years earlier, punishment for refusing to work for a rival boss. The scars still showed. His right eye drooped where the knife had damaged nerves, but he had survived. He had risen. He had become the most powerful organized crime figure in America. Bumpy Johnson was 39. His path had been different. No immigrant struggle, no Lower East Side tenements. Something worse in many ways. A black man in America fighting for every scrap of respect, every inch of territory, every dollar that white men believed should belong only to them. They had been talking for nearly 2 hours. You could have started a war, Luciano said, tossing bread to a particularly aggressive duck. You knew that. Did it anyway. Could have, Bumpy agreed. But wars are expensive. In money, in men, in time that could be spent making both. Then why the presentation? 13 packages. The note. You could have made him simply disappear. Nobody would have known for certain. Bumpy was quiet for a moment. Do you know why your captain felt comfortable spitting in my face, Mr. Luciano? Luciano shook his head. because he believed there would be no consequences. He believed the color of my skin meant I was less than him, less than human. Therefore, anything he did to me was acceptable, expected, even admirable. Bumpy turned to look at Luciano directly. The presentation was not for Cortezy. He was beyond learning by then. It was for everyone else, a message to every man who might think, in the future, that he can treat me or my people as less than human without consequence. Has the message been received? Bumpy smiled slightly. You tell me, when was the last time one of your captains spat on a business partner? Luciano considered this, then laughed, genuine this time, not the bitter sound from 3 days earlier. Fair point. They sat in comfortable silence, watching ducks fight over the last breadcrumbs. I have a proposal, Luciano said finally. I'm listening. Harlem is yours, completely. We withdraw from the numbers, the policy banks, everything above 110th Street. You run it however you see fit, answer to no one. Bumpy raised an eyebrow. And in exchange, 20% of gross, paid monthly, cash, no arguments, no negotiations, no delays. 15%. 17.5. Done. Luciano reached into his jacket slowly, carefully, showing he was not reaching for a weapon. Withdrew a silver cigarette case. There's something else. Yes. What you did was impressive. Terrifying but impressive. The planning, the execution, the way you turned his fear against him before you ever touched him. Luciano exhaled smoke. I have never seen that kind of work from anyone. Not from our people. Not from the Irish. Not from anyone. And I've been in this business since I was 14. Bumpy said nothing. If you ever want to expand beyond Harlem, if you ever need assistance with problems outside your territory, I would be interested in discussing arrangements. For the first time in their conversation, Bumpy showed genuine surprise. This was unprecedented. Italian families did not offer partnerships to outsiders. They certainly did not offer partnerships to black men. You're offering me an alliance. I'm offering you recognition, Luciano corrected. Recognition of what you are, what you're capable of. The color of your skin means nothing to me. I grew up poor. I know what it's like to be treated as less than human. What matters is capability, and you, Mr. Johnson, are extremely capable. He extended his hand. Do we have an understanding? Bumpy looked at the hand. This hand belonged to a man who had ordered deaths, who had built an empire on blood and fear, who represented everything that had oppressed his people for generations. But it was also a hand extended in respect, in recognition of equality, in acknowledgement that Bumpy Johnson was not a subordinate, not a servant, not a tool to be used and discarded. He took it and shook. We have an understanding, Mr. Luciano. Call me Charles. Call me Bumpy. They sat a while longer, watching sun sparkle on water, speaking of business arrangements and territorial boundaries and practical details of their new partnership. Two men who should have been enemies, bound instead by mutual respect, forged in the most terrible way imaginable. When they finally stood to leave, Luciano paused. One question. The note mentioned you knew where everyone lived. Addresses of our families, our children's schools. Was that true, or were you bluffing? Bumpy smiled. Mr. Luciano, Charles, I never bluff. I never threaten what I cannot deliver. And I never, ever forget an insult. He tipped his hat. But I also never harm those who treat me with respect. Your families are safe. Your children are safe. You have my word, and my word is the only currency that truly matters in our business. Luciano nodded slowly. Good to know. They parted ways, Luciano heading south toward Manhattan, Bumpy heading north toward Harlem. two men walking in opposite directions, bound now by something stronger than blood or territory. News spread through the underworld within days. Bumpy Johnson had met with Lucky Luciano. They had shaken hands. An arrangement had been reached. Harlem was independent, and Bumpy Johnson was to be addressed, by everyone always, as Mr. Johnson. Not Bumpy, not boy, not any of the 1,000 degrading terms white men used for black men in 1934 America. Mr. Johnson, a small thing perhaps, a matter of words, but in a world where words could mean life or death, where respect was measured in forms of address, where a man's dignity could be stripped away with a single syllable, it was everything. This was the legacy of one spit. 13 pieces of meat, wrapped in butcher paper, one handshake on a park bench, and a lesson that would echo through the criminal underworld for the next 30 years. Bumpy Johnson went on to rule Harlem for 3 more decades. He became a legend, a myth, a figure so towering that his name would still be spoken with reverence long after his death. Movies would be made about him. Books would be written. His legacy would inspire generations of men who refused to accept that the color of their skin determined their worth. But it all began on a Thursday night in September 1934, when a drunk Italian captain made the worst decision of his short, miserable life. Remember that moment in the basement of Umberto's? 40 men laughing, saliva dripping down a black man's face. A silence that lasted exactly 40 seconds. Remember the white handkerchief, the way Bumpy folded it so carefully, so methodically, as if he had all the time in the world. Remember his smile? Not angry, not bitter. The smile of a man who had just received a gift he had been waiting for his entire life. That smile was the beginning of the end for Vinnie Cortezy. He just did not know it yet. Some men react to humiliation with rage. They explode. They make mistakes. They give their enemies exactly what those enemies want: proof of weakness, evidence of broken control. Bumpy Johnson was not that kind of man. He understood something that Cortezy, in his arrogance, could never comprehend. Violence without purpose is mere brutality. Any animal can lash out when wounded. But violence with meaning, violence that communicates, that teaches, that changes the world, that requires something more, that requires patience, planning, the willingness to wait until the perfect moment. 11 days. That was how long Bumpy waited. 11 days of letting Cortezy believe he had won. 11 days of letting the laughter echo through Little Italy. 11 days of letting the story grow. How the great Bumpy Johnson had been humiliated, broken, sent running with spit on his face. And then, on the 12th day, 13 packages arrived at Lucky Luciano's door. The message was not the violence itself. The message was the precision, the patience, the absolute certainty that Bumpy Johnson would find you no matter where you hid, no matter how many guards you hired, no matter how thick your steel doors. Within a month, every gangster in New York knew the story. Within a year, it had spread to Chicago, Philadelphia, Los Angeles. Within a decade, it had become legend. The tale of what happens when you disrespect a man who refuses to be disrespected. And the lesson was simple. Respect is not given. It is taken. Those who forget this truth pay the price. Every single time. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968 at a restaurant in Harlem, surrounded by friends. He was 73 years old. He had outlived Dutch Schultz, who was gunned down in a Newark chop house. He had outlived Lucky Luciano, who died of a heart attack in Naples. He had outlived almost everyone who had ever tried to destroy him. At his funeral, thousands lined the streets of Harlem, black and white, rich and poor, criminals and honest citizens, all of them paying respects to a man who had demanded respect and received it. Among the floral arrangements was one with no card, no name, no indication of who had sent it. But those who knew understood. It came from the Italian families, from men who had learned 34 years earlier that some people cannot be humiliated, that some debts must be paid in full, that some lessons once taught are never forgotten. The arrangement was simple: 13 white roses, one for each piece. What happens when a man spits in your face in front of 40 witnesses and you just smile and walk away? Now you know, 13 pieces, exactly that many. Respect is mutual. Never forget it.